All right, Trainiacs, let's just roll you in a little bit there. Don't want to give you a full tour of the new revamped, renovated studio. All of that all around here. Very, very different. This is all going to be different. There's a little sneak peek of one thing right there, but that's not what we're talking about today. Today we are talking about the Half Ironman World Championships in Nice, France for 2019. The 70.3 on one of the hilliest courses on the circuit. We're going to talk about who the pro favorites are on the men's and the women's side, who I expect to see on the podium, who might just have some breakout performances. Let's do it. So Trainiacs, every year let's not be too casual. Every year I say that it is the most competitive year that the Half Ironman World Championships have taken place. Every year the field gets stronger, the athletes get stronger. More and more athletes are focusing exclusively on Half Ironman distance before they step up to the full Ironman distance. And some of the best in the world who focus on the Ironman distance come down to the Half Ironman distance to work on their speed. And that is no different this year. We are seeing so many athletes that could potentially win in Nice, France this year that it's probably the hardest year I've been able to say this is my pick for the podium. Let's get into it, starting with the women's field. I think if I were to say anything besides Daniela Ryf as the favorite in the women's field, I'd be kidding you. She has really only lost 2 races in the last 5 years. And while I think that this is the first race in years that she is going to be legitimately competed against for the win, I still think that people have to prove that they can beat her. And she has to show chinks in the armor, which she hasn't shown in about 2 years. So I think that the hands down favorite has to be Daniela Ryf. She's coming out close to the front on the swim. She's the strongest cyclist in the field, and she's always been capable of putting out one of the fastest, if not the fastest, run performances. Put that all together, and she's got to be the favorite. But I think that this year, unlike other years, there are 3 challengers that have a very legitimate shot at unseating her as the queen of long distance racing. The first, of course, being Lucy Charles-Barclay. Now Lucy, we all know she's going to come out in the front of the swim. She has shown that she has developed the bike strength to bike with Daniela. As we saw last year in 70.3 Worlds from South Africa, she hung on to Daniela's wheel instead of letting her ride away. And her run speed this year is better than it's ever been. Knowledge that I've got about Lucy is that we have yet to see just how strong she is on the run. Put her in a position where she has to show it off, and we just might see her unseat Daniela Ryf. The second athlete that I think could unseat Daniela Ryf is Annie Haug. Now, Annie Haug just recently set a course record at Ironman Copenhagen, flirting with that 8:30, just like Lucy was in Roth and in full Ironman South Africa. This is an insanely fast time for the women's field, but in Annie Haug's case, it was on a little bit easier course than we've seen Lucy and Daniela put out those 8:30 times in. She's also not great in the swim. She's okay on the bike, but certainly not to the extent of Daniela Ryf or Lucy Charles kind of fitness, but she has an amazing run. And she's gonna have to put out a run that is probably 4 to 5 minutes faster than Lucy or Daniela, which essentially she did last year, but she's gotta come out in the bike much, much closer than she did last year. The next athlete that I think could potentially be there right on top of the podium is Holly Lawrence. She was a champion several years ago, and Daniela Ryf actually credits her as being the female athlete that has stepped up the game in half Ironman racing, making it insanely fast. She's really fast on the swim, really fast on the bike, really fast on the run, and in all but one of her 5 races this year, she's flirted with that 4-hour half Ironman time, which is like gold standard, where if you're putting out a 4-hour half Ironman on the women's side, odds are really good that you're going to win. However, in this field, it's gonna be pretty tough for her. Now, I think that there are 4 female athletes that can kind of squeak their way onto the podium that we might not be expecting in that really elite 1% of 1% of 1% that I just talked about. The first being Sarah Crowley, who's finished on the podium in Kona. The thing about Sarah though is that I look at her as like a locomotive. She needs a lot of room to let her run talents show. And she needs a full Ironman course to show that she is one of the best in the world when she has that amount of room on that length of course. So do I expect her to get onto the podium? No, but she certainly can. She's an amazing athlete. Next is Radka Kalefeld. She wins basically everything that she goes into. She races a ton, but when she comes up against the best in the world, she's in that like 4th to 8th kind of spot. So while she could have an exceptional day because she has been having an exceptional year and just squeak her way onto the podium, which wouldn't surprise me, but I wouldn't expect it of her either just because of the talent of the field. Next is Ellie Salthouse, who is a young gun who is showing herself depending on the race because she's had a bit of a history of injuries over the past few years, but she's proven herself to be like the elite of the elite of the elite. She doesn't really have a weakness, but is she strong enough to compete with those other athletes that aren't just like excellent world class, but like amazing, unbelievable world class? Has yet to be seen. Finally, I think that if there is a dark horse in the field that can really surprise a lot of people that not a lot of folks out there are thinking about, it's Chelsea Sodaro. Now, Chelsea Sodaro is just a second-year pro, but in just the 2 years and the few races that she's raced in, she has beat some of the best in the world. She's coming at this from a run background, and the runs that she's putting down in these races are like field-crushing kind of runs. So can she come out front in the swim? Probably not, but can she be close enough that she doesn't have to work terribly hard on the bike to allow her some fresh legs to show those running capabilities off? It's really hard when you get 10 to 15 athletes that are all amazing world class. It takes a lot out of your legs because the pace gets pushed so hard that essentially everyone has to be the very best they can possibly be in the swim, the bike, and the run. You can't have a weakness overall, and you can't have a weakness on that day. Now let's get into the men's race, where I don't think we have as clear a favorite as we do on the women's side. I think it's a bit of a two-horse race on the men's side, with Alistair Brownlee, last year's second place finisher, and Javier Gomez, previous half Ironman world champion, and the third place finisher from last year. Between those two, I would probably give the edge to Alistair. They're both going to be basically front pack in the swim. They're both probably a couple of the best runners in the field, but Alistair seems to be quite the beast on the bike. He's had some races where he's outbiked Cameron Wurf, Lionel Sanders, the uber bikers in the world. So Alistair has those legs to go really hard on the bike and go really hard on the run. Where a little birdie told me that in 2018 at the Half Ironman World Championships, Javier Gomez did not lead on the bike once. Now, not that much further back, I think that there are two athletes that could surprise us and not just get on the podium, but I think potentially win the event. The first being Christian Blumenfeld, who's been specializing in ITU racing, but in the last couple of years, he's dabbled a little bit in half Ironman distance racing, doing so really successfully, putting out a 3:29 half Ironman in Bahrain. Now, Bahrain is kind of like a course that's just set up for nothing but personal best, but you still have to race a 3:29. He's also been really strong in ITU, and to do that, you have to be strong in the swim, you have to be strong in the run. The question is, can an ITU athlete quickly come up to long distance racing and be strong on the bike? And that always just takes a few years to find out. Next is Ben Canute, who finished second 2 years ago, fourth last year, and is probably the single best athlete as far as talent-wise going from one distance to the next. He's won sprint races, Olympic races, he's won relays, he's won half Ironman races. He kind of goes all over, and he's basically the epitome of if you're fit, you're fit. And he's always fit, and he's been putting in a lot of good training over the last little while, and I think that this could be the year that he potentially surprises everyone and gets that first, second spot. In Ben's case, it always comes down to the run because he's a front pack, if not first out of the water kind of athlete. He's really strong as well on the bike. And the run has been where he's been putting in a lot of work, and he's been putting in a lot of strength-based, really speed, really intense, focused hill running, tire pulling kind of work. That might just be the key to unlocking his race success. Now, potential athletes that could get their way onto the podium, but I think would require some of those athletes that I've already mentioned to maybe have a bad day. Well, first I think would be Sam Appleton. Sam is a phenomenal swimmer, probably the most underrated biker in the field. He was 6th last year in half Ironman Worlds, wins a lot, but his health, his performances have been a little erratic over the last couple years. Next is Sebastian Kienle, and I love Sebi. Sebi is hilarious, probably one of the funniest guys in triathlon, one of the best bikers in triathlon. He's a previous half Ironman World Championship winner. But fact of the matter is, when you have so many athletes now coming in, focusing on half Ironman distance racing, previous ITU athletes that are amazing swimmers, amazing runners, and develop into good bikers, you've got to be really well-rounded. In Sebi's case, he's not quite the swimmer of those front pack people. He's not quite the runner of those front pack athletes. He's an amazing biker, which will help him on this really difficult bike course in Nice, but I think these days you've got to be strong on the swim, the bike, and the run to win. Patrick Lange, as far as I know, this is the first time that he's competed in the half Ironman World Championships because he's always so focused on Kona. Now in Patrick's case, being a very light athlete, that could help him quite a bit on the bike course where power to weight makes a really big difference. However, I think in Patrick's case, even though he is one of the best runners in the field, that might only be at the Ironman distance. I got nothing but respect for the guy's run, but personally, I tend to see Patrick do really, really well in really long races in really hot conditions because he's so light, he's able to keep cool and maintain a really high pace. That's why we see him do so well at Kona. I think Kona is perfectly made for him, whereas Nice might not be. Finally, I think an athlete that could surprise a lot of us is Rudy von Berg. Now, Rudy is a young athlete that's been winning a ton out there. He placed 10th last year. Was actually kind of disappointed in that, even though I thought it was fantastic. But we had him on the podcast just recently. He grew up 45 minutes from the race course. He won the Nice test event recently, so he knows the course really, really well. He's been, like I say, winning just about everything, and he's been on the podcast. That actually, legitimately, it tends to send people off to have a good few months afterwards. So, if you want to hear more about the Ironman Nice 70.3 World Championships 2019 race course, go to triathlontaren.com and listen to our podcast with Rudy, where he talks about the race course itself, the strategy of how you approach the swim, the bike, and the run, because he knows it so very well that we got him on the podcast to talk about that. And if you aren't already subscribed and you like these sorts of things, the coverage of World Championships events, it's not very long until we're off to Kona, so hit that subscribe button below. Later, Trainiacs. This is going to be an exciting race.